The folder on Jay Leno's desk had Tupac Shakur's sealed juvenile records visible on the tab. June 1995, NBC Studios. And that's when Pac knew this wasn't just another interview. They'd gone into sealed court documents, into things that had been expunged, into records that shouldn't legally exist anymore. Jay Leno sat across from him with that talk show host smile, fingers resting on that impossibly thick folder like it was evidence in a trial. And Pac's first thought was, how the hell did they unseal juvenile records? The handshake had been too firm, the greeting too rehearsed. And now this, a folder marked Shakur 1983-1991, sitting right there on the desk where millions of viewers could see it, where cameras could catch it, where Pac would spend the entire interview staring at his past packaged for primetime execution. What was about to go down? His manager was backstage, and even from here, Pac could see the dude looked nervous as hell, sweating, pacing, like he'd tried to stop this and couldn't. The crew was acting strange too. No eye contact, tense movements. The makeup artist who'd touched up his face 30 minutes ago had whispered, "I'm sorry, Pac," as she left. And at the time he thought she meant the powder shade, but now he understood. They all knew what was coming. Everyone except the studio audience, clapping and cheering like this was just another celebrity interview, not knowing they were about to witness either a public assassination or something else entirely. Jay started the show smooth, professional. Welcome back to The Tonight Show. Tonight we have Tupac Shakur, one of the most controversial figures in hip-hop. Not influential, not talented, controversial. The word hung there like an indictment. The audience's applause faded and Jay didn't wait. He went straight for it. "Tupac, we need to talk about your past, your real past. Not the version you rap about, but what actually happened in those streets." He reached for the folder, opened it, and Pac saw pages and pages of documents, police reports, sealed records, things that shouldn't exist anymore, things that had been legally buried when he was a minor. How did they get these? Jay pulled out the first document. It's 1991, Oakland. You were involved in an incident. The charges were dropped, but the police report tells a different story than what you've said publicly. He started reading. Details about a confrontation with police. Names Pac hadn't heard in years. And here's what made it devastating. Some of it was true. Twisted, stripped of context, missing why it happened, but true enough that he couldn't just deny it. That was the genius of it. Mix truth with lies until nobody can tell what's real. The audience was quiet now. Uncomfortable. This wasn't entertainment. This was personal, invasive, but Jay kept going. Document after document. An arrest from when he was 17. Medical records from when he got shot in 1994. Financial records showing debts, legal fees, struggle. Each piece carefully selected to paint a picture of someone violent, someone unstable, someone dangerous. And that's when Pac noticed something. Jay wasn't just reading randomly. There was an order to this. A building narrative. Each revelation designed to set up the next one, climbing toward something bigger. What was the end game here? Was he building toward something even worse? The man in the dark suit in the front row was taking notes. No expression, just writing everything down. Was he recording every word for someone else? A woman next to him kept checking her papers, then looking at Pac, then checking her papers again. Were they coordinating this in real time? Was this being sent somewhere else? To people waiting to use this information? Jay pulled out a photograph. Old, grainy, but clear enough. Young Pac at what looked like a party in Baltimore. This was taken in 1991. Do you remember this night? Pac looked at it. He did remember, sort of. That whole year was chaos. Moving to the Bay, trying to make it, meeting the wrong people and the right people. But why was this photograph important? What was Jay building toward? Why show this specific moment? This party, Jay continued, was hosted by Marcus DeLuca. Does that name mean anything to you? And there it was. The name that made everything else make sense. The name that connected dots Pac hadn't even known needed connecting. But how deep did the connection go? What else did Jay know? Marcus DeLuca, a music executive who'd tried to sign Pac in 1991, back when he was just starting with Digital Underground, who'd offered him a deal that would have given DeLuca total control over his publishing and masters, who'd threatened him when Pac signed with Interscope instead, who'd supposedly left the industry in 1993, or so everyone thought. Marcus DeLuca, Jay said, disappeared from the music business 2 years ago, officially retired. But there are questions. Questions about his business practices in the early 90s. Questions about artists he controlled. And questions about what happened to people who refused to work with him. Was Jay implying what it sounded like he was implying? That Pac had something to do with DeLuca's disappearance? That was crazy. That was beyond crazy. But looking at Jay's face, at the careful way he was presenting this, Pac realized this wasn't about truth. This was about creating doubt, about planting seeds, about making millions of people wonder. Was that the real goal? Not to prove anything, but just to make people question. The audience was riveted now. This had gone from uncomfortable to shocking. The media had to be recording every word. MTV probably already had their cameras ready, and Pac was sitting there live on national television, being accused of something Jay never quite said directly. But the implication was clear. How many other people were watching this and believing it? Pac felt that familiar rage rising, the same anger that fueled his most powerful verses. But getting angry was exactly what they wanted. They wanted him to explode, to threaten, to prove their narrative about him being violent. So he pushed it down, stayed calm, waited. Because something about this whole thing felt off. Not just wrong, but strategically off. Like Jay was playing a game without knowing someone had changed the rules. The questions kept coming, but now they were different, softer. About his relationship with Death Row Records, about his beef with other artists, about decisions he'd made, deals he'd signed, people he'd trusted. And that's when Pac started to see the real pattern. This wasn't about his past. Not really. This was about his present. About his independence. About the fact that he owned his own publishing on his new material, controlled his own destiny, answered to nobody but himself. But how long had they been planning this? Months? Years? Jay shifted tactics, pulled out more documents. Death Row Records has been under investigation. Your association with them with Suge Knight has raised questions. Some people say you're being used, that you've lost control. What do you say to that? Because those people wanted him to sell his publishing, Pac thought. Wanted him to sign away his rights. Wanted him dependent on the system. But he didn't say that, not yet. He was starting to understand the full scope of what was happening here. This wasn't just an interview. It was a pressure tactic. Public humiliation to force his hand. Make him look violent, unstable, out of control. Then swoop in with a save your career offer. Classic industry warfare. But who had designed this strategy? Was Jay even smart enough to orchestrate all this? Jay kept pressing. You've had very public conflicts. The shooting in New York, the legal troubles.
The anger in your music.
Some people say you have a death wish. Do you think you're self-destructive? Ah, there it was. The psychological angle. Paint him as unstable, as someone who can't be trusted with his own career. Someone who needs handlers, needs management, needs someone to save him from himself. But was this really about psychology? Or was it just another pressure point? The audience was uncomfortable again, but differently now. Some looked sympathetic to Pac. Others looked concerned. Jay was skilled at this. He'd done his homework. Every question designed to chip away, to create doubt, to make people wonder if maybe Pac really was the problem. And here's the thing, some of it was fair. He had been shot. He had been to prison. His life had been violent. But context mattered. Why he'd been targeted, why he'd fought back, who he'd been fighting against. And Jay was deliberately leaving out all of that context, presenting a version of events that served his narrative. Was this how they operated with everyone? Build a case using partial truths? Jay pulled out another document. 3 months ago, you were approached about selling your publishing rights. A very generous offer. 7 figures. You refused. Can you tell us why? There it was. The real question. The one all of this had been building toward. And suddenly the folder, the documents, the accusations, all of it made sense. This was leverage. This was pressure. This was someone trying to destroy him publicly because they couldn't control him privately. Pac looked at Jay, really looked at him, saw the sweat on his forehead, the way his hands shook slightly when he wasn't holding the papers, the nervous glances toward the control room. Jay wasn't the architect here. He was just the weapon. But who was pulling the trigger? Could it be someone in that control room? Or watching from somewhere else? The studio audience was completely silent now. Nobody moving. Nobody breathing. Just watching. Waiting. Was everyone feeling this tension? Did they sense something bigger was happening? And Pac made a decision. He smiled, not a nervous smile. Not a performance smile. A real smile of understanding. the smile of someone who'd survived too much to be scared now. "You know what's interesting, Jay?" His voice was calm. That voice that had sold millions of records. "You've done a lot of research into my past. Real thorough. Must have taken months, but there's one thing you forgot to research." He let the pause hang there, let Jay start to sweat more, let the audience lean forward. "You forgot to research what happens when you try to break someone who's already been broken and rebuilt themselves." The shift was immediate. The control room producers started making frantic signals. The cameras were still rolling. This was live, no editing. "See, here's the thing about that folder," Pac continued. "It's impressive, real impressive." Someone went deep. "Sealed juvenile records, police reports, private documents. That's not easy to get. That's expensive. That takes serious connections." So I started asking myself, who has that kind of money, that kind of access, that kind of motivation? Jay tried to interrupt. "I don't know what you're suggesting." "I'm not suggesting anything," Pac cut him off. "I'm telling you. Someone wanted me on this show, specifically tonight. They wanted this ambush. They wanted these documents read on air. And when my team tried to reschedule last week saying I had studio time, your network threatened breach of contract. You ever threatened to sue over a rescheduled interview, Jay?" The audience was starting to understand. You could feel the energy shifting. This wasn't just an interview anymore. This was something bigger. "My team did some digging too," Pac said. "Found out some interesting things about your show. About new consultants you brought on recently. About where your funding comes from now. About who's really calling the shots." He was building now, piece by piece, not giving away too much, just enough to make people wonder. "That name you mentioned. Marcus DeLuca. He didn't retire in 1993. He went underground. Federal investigation was closing in. RICO charges. Money laundering. He disappeared, changed his identity, kept working in the industry through front companies. You know who he works for now, Jay?" The studio went dead silent. Even the crew had stopped moving. "He works for the same people who tried to buy my publishing 3 months ago. The same people who've been consolidating hip-hop labels across the industry. The same people who hired you as a consultant right before you invited me on this show." Jay's face went white. I can't discuss." "You don't have to discuss it," Pac said. "The documents speak for themselves. My lawyers have copies. So do several journalists. So does the FBI, actually. Because it turns out RICO violations and identity fraud are kind of their thing." The audience erupted, some people standing, some just shocked. The man in the dark suit was already leaving. The woman with the papers looked panicked. And Jay sat there realizing his ambush had just been turned against him. But Pac wasn't done. Because this was the moment. This was where everything had to come together. Where the real truth had to drop. "But here's what you really didn't know," Pac said, and his voice got quieter, more intense. "Marcus DeLuca didn't just try to sign me in 1991. He had my stepfather on payroll. Tupac Shakur, who was in prison, who needed money for legal fees. DeLuca found him. Paid for his appeals. Had him try to convince me to sign with DeLuca instead of Interscope. And when I found out, when I chose my own path, DeLuca tried to destroy me. Planted stories about me being in gangs. Made sure certain radio stations wouldn't play my music. That's why my early career was harder than it should have been. That's why I had to fight so hard for every opportunity. Because I said no to him once and he spent years making me pay for it." The studio was absolutely silent now. This was the real story. The deeper layer, the personal connection that made everything else make sense. So when they came back 3 months ago, when they offered me millions to sell my publishing, to sign over my masters, to basically hand them control over everything I'd built, I didn't just say no because of business. I said no because I knew what they really wanted. They wanted to finish what DeLuca started in 1991. They wanted to own me, control me, make sure I could never be truly independent. He looked directly at the camera now, speaking to millions. "And this whole thing tonight? This ambush with the documents and the allegations and the implications? This was their response. If I won't sell, they'll destroy me publicly. Make people doubt me. Make me toxic so nobody wants to work with me. Classic DeLuca playbook. Except I've been dealing with this for 4 years. And I'm still here. Still standing. Still fighting." The applause started, then grew, then became deafening. People on their feet. Even some crew members clapping. And Jay sat there, destroyed, knowing his career had just ended live on television. Pac stood up, looked at Jay one more time. You were just doing your job. I understand, but you should have asked yourself why they needed you to do it, what they were really afraid of. Because people don't try this hard to destroy someone unless that person has power they can't control. He walked off the stage, didn't run, just walked away like he'd already won. Backstage was chaos. His manager grabbed him eyes wide. How did you know about DeLuca? About Mutalu? We didn't have that information. I've always known, Pac said quietly. I just never told anyone. Some things you keep private. But when they threatened everything I built, when they tried to use my family against me, I decided it was time to expose them. They left the building through the back. His pager was already blowing up. Snoop, that was real, homie. Dr. Dre, you just changed the game. Messages from artists he'd never met. Journalists requesting interviews. Lawyers wanting to help, but also 3 calls from unknown numbers. He answered the third one. Mr. Shakur, a voice he didn't recognize. Male, older, tired. My name is James Rivera. I worked for Marcus DeLuca for 3 years. What you said tonight about your stepfather, about the industry sabotage, it's all true. I have documents, contracts, recordings, everything, and I want to give them to you. Because what they did to you, they did to dozens of others. And it's time it stopped. Why now? Pac asked. Why help me now? Could this be another trap? Was someone listening to this call? Because my nephew is a rapper. He's 19. He asked me last week why you're considered dangerous when you're just talented, and I couldn't tell him the truth. That you have every right to be angry. That we tried to break you, and when we couldn't, we tried to erase you. Tonight, watching you expose it all, I realized I have a choice. The call ended. Pac looked at his manager. This is about to get way bigger. You ready? Are you? His manager asked. Had his manager known this would spiral this far? What else hadn't he been told? Pac thought about his mother. About every young artist in the hood trying to make it without selling out. About everyone who'd ever been told they had to compromise to survive. Yeah, he said. I'm ready. Over the next few weeks, the story exploded. James Rivera released his documents. Thousands of pages, contracts dating back 4 years showing coordinated campaigns against dozens of artists. Spreadsheets tracking who'd been neutralized and who was still in play. Meeting notes discussing acquisition targets like they were discussing product, not human beings making art. But the documents raised more questions than they answered. Who else was involved? How deep did this go? Other former employees came forward. A woman from DeLuca's management company described how they'd plant negative stories, pay street reporters for hit pieces, coordinate campaigns across multiple media outlets. She had recordings of meetings where they'd laughed about destroying careers. But her testimony revealed something else. The management company had a parent corporation nobody had investigated yet. What did that company do? A junior executive came forward next. He'd been in quarterly meetings reviewing their roster, which labels they influenced, which artists they controlled. Pac's name had been on that threat list for years, marked high-priority neutralization. He brought financial records, money trails from shell companies in Panama, offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, and one name that appeared on multiple transfers. Could this go higher than anyone thought? The FBI opened an investigation. But it wasn't just about DeLuca anymore. It was about the whole system. RICO violations, money laundering, racketeering, the kind of charges that could bring down an entire operation. Congressional hearings were scheduled. Senators suddenly very interested in organized crime in the entertainment industry. Jay Leno's show faced serious scrutiny. The network issued a statement about reviewing editorial practices and investigating source verification. Translation: they knew they'd been used as a weapon and were trying to distance themselves before the lawsuit started. 3 major executives quietly resigned. No press releases, just suddenly gone. Lawyers already circling. DeLuca, using his new identity as Martin Davis, was arrested trying to leave the country. Private plane to Mexico, bags full of computer disks and cash. The disks contained everything. Every manipulation, every destroyed career, every artist they'd crushed. It was all there. Evidence that would keep prosecutors busy for years. And the entertainment conglomerate behind it all faced a massive federal investigation. Artists started coming forward with their own stories. Similar tactics, similar threats, similar choices between selling out or being destroyed. A rapper from Atlanta released a statement. describing how they'd offered him $2 million for his publishing, and when he said no, he couldn't get distribution anywhere. Radio stopped playing his music. Within 6 months, broke. Within a year, done with music. He thought it was his fault. Now he understood. It had all been coordinated. An R&B artist from Detroit had recordings, phone calls where an executive threatened him, "Sign with us or we'll bury you." He released them to the press. They spread like wildfire. More artists started sharing. The Own Your Masters movement spread across hip-hop. Stories from dozens, then hundreds of artists. The pattern was undeniable. This was organized. A machine designed to extract value from creative people and, if they wouldn't submit, to destroy them. But these weren't just stories of victimization. They were stories of survival. Artists who'd been crushed and rebuilt. And now, seeing Pac expose the machinery, they felt permission to speak. But here's what most people didn't know, what never made it into the news reports. Pac had known about the FBI investigation for months. His refusal to sell wasn't just about independence. It was about keeping the company engaged, making them desperate enough to do something stupid, something public, something that would give prosecutors what they needed. The interview was the trap. Jay was the weapon, but Pac was the one who'd said it. His manager had been the anonymous source who told NBC about Pac wanting to reschedule, knowing the network would push back hard, knowing it would create the exact situation they needed. The folder with the juvenile records? Pac's team had leaked that detail to DeLuca's people, knowing they couldn't resist using it, knowing it would make their violation of sealed records undeniable on camera. Every piece had been carefully placed, every move calculated. The ambush was real, but Pac had been ready for it. More than ready. He'd been counting on it. 3 months later, the settlement payments started. Millions paid out to artists who'd been targeted. New regulations proposed to protect artist rights, and slowly, carefully, the system started to change. Not completely, not perfectly, but enough. Pac kept making music, but now his tracks had new layers. References to what had happened, to what he'd learned, to what he'd survived. Fans who'd followed the story heard those references and understood. Newer fans discovered them and went looking for context, and the legend grew. There was one thing that never got explained, though. One detail that Pac kept to himself. The photograph Jay had shown. The party in 1991 with Marcus DeLuca. In the background of that photo, barely visible, was another person. Someone Pac recognized, but whose face was too blurry for anyone else to identify. Someone who'd been there that night and had witnessed the first time Pac said no to DeLuca. Someone who'd been watching this whole thing play out for 4 years. Pac never said who it was. Never confirmed or denied the various theories. That was layer 5, the core truth. The mystery that would never be fully solved. Because some secrets are more powerful when they stay secret. Some questions are more important than their answers. In interviews over the following months, people would ask him about that night. About the Jay Leno ambush. About how he'd turned the tables so completely. And Pac would smile that same knowing smile and say, "I grew up in the struggle." Baltimore, Harlem, Oakland. You learn early that when someone comes at you, you better know why. You better know what they want. And you better know how to take it away from them. Everything else is just noise. The interview became a case study. A moment, a reminder. That truth, when spoken clearly and fearlessly, when backed by preparation and courage, can defeat even the most elaborate conspiracy. That one person, armed with facts and unwilling to back down, can change everything. That June night in 1995, Jay Leno thought he was destroying Tupac Shakur. What he didn't know was that he was giving him a platform. And Pac took it. Because that's what he'd been doing his whole life. Taking the worst moments and turning them into exactly what he needed them to be. Lessons. For everyone watching. For everyone fighting their own battles. For everyone in the hood who'd ever been told to compromise or die. The answer was always no. And if they tried to destroy you for it, you destroyed them right back. With truth. With preparation. If you're smart enough, ready enough, if you refuse to be broken, you can turn their weapon into yours. And everything changes. 15 months later, in September 1996, Tupac Shakur was shot in Las Vegas. He died 6 days later. The industry conspiracy he'd exposed continued to face investigation, but the voice that had started it all was silenced. Some say the timing wasn't coincidental. Some say the people he exposed had long memories. The truth about that night in Las Vegas remains one of hip-hop's greatest unsolved mysteries. But what Pac did on that Tonight Show stage in June 1995 changed everything. It gave artists permission to fight back, to speak up, to refuse to be controlled. And in the years since his death, that legacy has only grown stronger. Artists own their masters now. They control their publishing. They build their own empires. Because one man refused to back down. One man exposed the machine. One man showed everyone that the system could be beaten, even if it cost him everything. Who do you think was in that photograph? Drop your theories in the comments below. And if you want more stories like this, hit subscribe. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next.